foundation of Heller's Cafe is a brand and co-brand with Warehouse was based on us loving the product, us loving the originals, and wanting to make something that we were proud of and that we loved and that we were hoping that the customers would love. But for me as a collector and a buyer and a dealer, that ultimately is my business strategy, is to get the piece. I want to handle the piece. And I think that's what's sort of given me the title King of Vintage. It's not that there aren't other guys out there doing what I do, but there aren't a lot of guys who are as committed to the pieces as I am. For them, a lot of people are making more business decisions than decisions based on loving the piece or loving working with the piece. And I would say in my case, I love working with the pieces. Whatever the piece is speaks to me. I think it's beautiful. I mean, it can't be just a 1920s piece, just because 1920s doesn't make it wonderful. You know, in the business now, you see a lot of people reproducing distressed stuff. Just because it's distressed and torn, it can be just look like heck and be junk as far as I'm concerned, or it can be beautiful. You have to be able to tell the difference in my mind. I like to think I can tell the difference. I essentially am someone who loves clothes and discovered vintage and literally fell heads and heels over in love with it. The quality of the clothing, the sense of craftsmanship, the sense that you could just look at it and say, this is wonderful. This is a wonderful piece of clothing. And the way I got in the business is I could recognize wonderful pieces of clothing, but they weren't necessarily what I wanted. And so I started selling clothing. And ultimately, in those days, there wasn't a lot of literature out on clothing. Now you can Google everything. You can Google, I don't need to tell you when Levi's started or when Buckleback started. You can Google it. But one thing you can't Google is the love, the absolute literal love that I have for what I've been able to do. You know, it's just personal satisfaction for myself, having created a company and a business with the reputation that I have, that there's still discovery for me. There's still part of what keeps me going as in the business is to discover more, to see pieces I haven't seen or realize something I haven't realized. So as much as there is information out there in catalogs and books and Google and internet, it isn't complete and it isn't always accurate. And that's what still makes it fun for me to be in the business, and really what sort of motivated me for the business to begin with. One of the things that set us apart as a brand and a sub-brand, even with Warehouse, is that all our pieces were based on original examples that came from my collection. And so usually our renditions of them would be based as exact as we could possibly get them. You know, workwear was made for a purpose. And when we went to remake the clothing, we kept in mind that it was made for a purpose. But now the purpose is a little bit different. Somebody wants to look good in what they're wearing. In some sense, it is fashion. But what we brought to the table in terms of our thought on the clothing is to create as much of that quality and that mindset that created the clothing at the same time. Some sense of purpose and quality, or even craftsmanship. I had one competitor say to me early on in my collaboration with Warehouse, you know, you guys don't need to do all those details. And I said, yeah, we really do, right? And this is a big company that also does reproduction and does a lot of really nice looking clothing. But Warehouse's commitment and my commitment was, let's see how well we can hit it. How well can we get this as close to where we think it realistically can be, given it isn't 100 years old and we're making it? Can we capture that life of that piece in the details, and will the customer appreciate that? That's what we were shooting for. So what we have here is a 1920s version of a bear jacket. Collectors call them bear jackets primarily because of the mouton on the outside. Sometimes there's hair. Some other versions will have horse hair and stuff like that, but this is mouton. What makes this such a unique piece and why it made it into the collection is that it has these patch pockets which are really unusual for this period. Primarily, they would have been slash pockets or sort of D pockets. These sort of patch outer pockets are very unusual. Has a flap. It's lined under the flap. Has a button front, which suggests also that it's probably 1920s because zippers really weren't used much until late 20s and early 30s. On the back, another detail that suggests it's 1920s is this strap. It's a very thin strap. It's an adjustment strap for the jacket, and sort of very long and thin. Very, very unusual. I've never seen another example of this jacket. The example I had was the only version of this I've ever seen. It really, I think, became one of my favorite pieces. In terms of production, what we actually did, what Warehouse did, is they got sort of this damaged pony hide. It gives it more of a used look, which is not really how Japanese usually produce their leather jackets. Often they look brand spanking new, even if they're based on a 1920s, 30s, or 40s jacket. This jacket actually has some sense of history to it in terms of a look. They really did an excellent job. The leather is nice and pliable and soft. I think it's a very wearable jacket. The design is extremely unique, and as a collector, the original was a one of a kind. So we've got a 1930s horsehide jacket, wool lining. What makes this jacket unique, not only once again do we have sort of a soft look to the leather, it has a good feel to it, but it isn't super shiny, doesn't look brand new, but the detail, the reason it made it into the collection is this detail here, this chin strap, which is used primarily to keep the wind out when you're working, when you're driving, that sort of thing. You don't see that on leather jackets. From this period, you'll see it on shirts, you'll see it on denim jackets, canvas jackets. Rarely do you see it on leather. So as a collector, that drew my interest to it. And for us to offer it as a production piece, just the look of it, the feel of it, and of course the uniqueness of it is why we included it. So this is based on a 1930s Pendleton wool jacket. You can see it's a Native American design, which Pendleton was famous for, and I think still famous for. In this period, it's more common to see the shorter waist jackets with an early type of cotton elastic around the waist. Very collectible, very desirable, very interesting, but this is even harder to find. This style jacket apparently was not as popular. And if I remember correctly, you could have Pendleton custom make you a jacket or coat at this time by whatever blanket selection you have. I've seen this particular pattern in different variations, this color pattern, but this is one that we really liked. We like the way that it has a sort of subtleness down here, not all across the chest, would make it a little bit too bold for my taste. But to find, a Pendleton 30s jacket for this design is pretty tough to do, and I like it, and it's a good function piece. I think the original had a belt, which we left off because they just tend to be a bit fussy. But otherwise, it's true to the original design. So what we have here is two pieces from a set that we did. We actually made at the time a pair of pants and a hat. The interesting thing about this is all the pieces, all 4 pieces for this particular set were found separately. I didn't find them all at one time, which this is 1920s or before. So to find separate pieces that actually match this set was pretty remarkable. I was really excited. Every time I found a piece, I was very excited. So the interesting part is this is what we call tailor-made. So it's more of a fitted 1920s and before sort of look to it. Generally speaking, even though this is a sack coat, it still has a little bit more of a tailored finish to it. It probably would have been for somebody who is working either in a shop, maybe on a factory floor, but more likely in a shop kind of wear. It is work clothing and not dress wear. What appealed to me is you very rarely, from this period, find cotton sort of tailor-made clothing. Most of it was wool, some was linen, primarily it was wool. So to find cotton from this period that was actual workwear, which is really kind of what I specialize in as both a collector and for design, was really exciting. And so that's how this came to be into the line. So what we have here is a gingham check jacket. The original was circa around 1890s. I bought it from a collector who is somebody who discovers stuff in mines. He actually makes a good living going into old gold mines, kind of finding where the old places are, where he's likely to find things. And he came up with this jacket. I saw the sample, and he was nice enough to sell it to me so I could put it in the collection, though we did have to give him a copy of the one we made. It has one pocket, which is, for that period, very common. It has a pleated front. It has on the back, once again, an adjustment strap, which later becomes different on jackets, but at this period, this is what people used to adjust for their waist. And these were actually really called blouses at the time. They really weren't even called jackets. And part of that is because they were very blousy on you, and they were meant to be worked in, which is what the purpose of this jacket was. It has sort of a rounded collar, which is not uncommon for that period. For Heller's Café and Warehouse, for all the pieces we did, this probably was our best seller and most popular piece that we did. What we have here is a dress shirt, 1930s, maybe even 1920s, but likely 1930s. And the unique part of it is, it's a dress shirt. Most workwear shirts at the time were not dress shirts, did not have the finishes of dress shirts. But what this has that lets me know that it's a work shirt, so once again it has that chin tab, which meant it was made for function. And what we have here is an opening, and what this opening is for a pocket watch. And once again suggesting that it's a work shirt. So the reason I liked it is because I had not seen before dress shirt details on a work shirt, or work shirt details on a dress shirt. I hadn't seen either. And so that's how this made it into the collection, is the uniqueness of the pocket, the chin strap, and also I just thought it was just a beautiful shirt, just as it is. So this is a, once again, 1930s workwear shirt. It's gray. Often these are called salt and pepper, but usually actually the salt and pepper shirts are a little more black. This is more gray. But generally speaking, we call it a salt and pepper shirt. It's a two-pocket, has nice details, no flaps, has the chin strap, which collectors once again find very interesting and desirable. The color is relatively unique for the period. More often than not, it would be blue chambray. So for a gray chambray, from this period is a little bit unique, and we thought it worked as a good basic piece to fit into denim, kind of a go for a variety of different looks and pieces. So what we have is a 1940s officer's chino. I think we know that because of the coin pocket here. What made this unique, not only are military chinos, of course, a classic utilitarian pant and design that is lasted, for 50, 60, 70 years now, is that the original sample had actually this green herringbone inside. Now, normally that wouldn't be the case. Normally on officers' chinos or chinos, the material would match. It'd be the same material as outside. But I'm assuming at the time, because of shortage materials and a push for production, they used what they had. And this is a pretty unique distinction to see, because of course they had quartermaster details that they had to do. So it had to be made a certain way with certain things, but you could see that they pushed that detail on this particular pant, and that gave it just enough of an interesting distinction for me to want to put it in the collection. Here we have another khaki. This is a Biltmore, which was made by Levi Strauss, probably 1930s, maybe 1920s, but I'm thinking more 1930s on this particular piece. And you can see it's a basic chino. This is a little bit more porous than sometimes they are, but has a little bit of texture to it, which gives it kind of a nice feel. Cut-wise, it's a little different. I, in fact, have the original cut, the original pant. This is the original Levi Biltmore that it was based on. And you can see why I fell in love with it. It has just the perfect amount of soiling. It has a little bit of paint. It's a little oversized. I actually have worn this pant and really enjoy it. There's the original label in there. One thing that I think that we noted is it's so hard to reproduce the life of the piece. This is 70, maybe 80 years old, and it has the feel of something like that. We did our best to put that sort of feel and texture into the pant. You can see this has been washed down a little bit, but you'll probably have to put your own life into it to get the 80 years of the original. So what we have here is what I think, and I don't recall the brand on this particular one, but this is probably, once again, 1910, maybe 1920s. The details that make it so interesting are these cinches up here, the novelty of how those are used, and the fabric itself. The fabric is really more like a canvas denim, and so it has a nice stiff sort of texture to it. It feels really good to the hand. The cut is a little bit, it's a very, very straight leg pant, but it gives it more of that sense of authenticity from that period. One of the ways we date pieces like this is you have the tool pocket is actually separate from the pocket up here. Later on in the 30s, you'll see that pocket be actually semi-attached to this pocket. How this is dropped down is how we sort of get general periods of from when this is produced. So here we have the same pant with a one wash, so it still has the same sort of texture and feel to it. It's a little more relaxed, which sometimes can be a little more comfortable to wear. And you can note the one thing that I hadn't mentioned, it has this great pocket detail to it. The stitching here, it really seems more ornate than purposeful, but gives it kind of a unique look and makes it sort of interesting. And we've got the third version of this, which is probably more like what the original example looked like. So a lot of staining, some bleaching, a handful of washes, gives it really what I think is an authentic look. I don't think that this pant has a full look to it at all. I think this really does a nice job of recreating what this pant would have looked like had you worked in this pant in that period. So here we have a denim pant that's a buckle back. You see it's got the back strap there, which we talked about on a couple of the other pieces. It has these crazy scoop pockets back here, which seems like it probably just gave you better access to a box, so it actually had a function rather than just a design. But it has this great, great cut to it. And I think it really gives it some real sense of uniqueness and specialness the way that they designed the pockets. They've overlapped on the seams here, which is somewhat unusual. Got exposed rivets on the outside, which was patented by Levi Strauss. You can see on the front, they also have this sort of ornate detail, which you'll occasionally find in very early pieces. The original example on this pant is probably 1880s, 1890s. The brand was Non-Perel, which also did use, like we've used for Heller's Café brand here, a cloth label. They actually used a cloth label. This design of pocket we used even forward, took off the belt on other pieces, but this is an original design with this sort of pocket, the buckle back, cloth label, ornate design. This was a real work pant. You even get into, in this period, where they would have a reinforced crotch, which is made obviously for durability and stress. The rivet in the crotch which was typical of that period for, once again, stress and durability. So you've got, I think, a really beautiful example and really unique pocket design for this period.